की चोटी पे देखने को स्माइल करूँ नहीं करूँ? Good evening, everyone. Can I please request you all to take your seats? On behalf of Wilson College Alumni Association, I extend a very warm welcome to all of you to the second edition of the Wilson Dialogue, an evening with literary stars. We are truly honored to have with us today our distinguished speakers, celebrated novelist, poet, and musician, Mr. Jeet Thayil, acclaimed writer and essayist, Mr. Abhrajyoti Chakraborty. Along with them, we have our members of the Alumni Association, respected faculty, beloved alumni, and the students who form the heart of Wilson College. A very warm welcome to one and all. To take the evening forward, I would like to invite Professor Sudhakar Solomon Raj to kindly introduce our speakers.
Good evening, and I'm really very happy to have two people, two people in different ways. Jeet and I were classmates, but we didn't really know each other much because he was in literature, I was in political science and economics. He was in the St. Andrews hostel from first year. I joined towards the end of that time. So my memory of him was, I don't know if he remembers, for the hostel day he performed. Tejasvi mentioned that he's a musician. He was a remarkable musician. I remember I have glimpses of that performance. We used to have the program, a lot of young people don't know, we used to have an auditorium on the third floor above the canteen. So that's where he performed. And I've been following Jeet in terms of, I used to have his book on poetry for some time, then somebody borrowed it, never came back. Then when Narcopolis was released, I remember having the book, and I was just reminded by one of my, I don't know whether Yash is here, there's one student, when I invited him for this, he sent me a picture of Narcopolis, which a classmate of his had gifted him because I had spoken about the book in class. And so it's been very interesting following the different kind of work, writing, and the stuff he's doing. I've been planning to really, I've been wanting him to come to Wilson to talk to our students. I'm very happy that this evening before this session that he was able to give time for some of the students who were there. I'm sure it was very insightful for the young people. So I'm very glad he's here. We've been wanting, but it happened now, so I'm very happy. Welcome, Jeet, and we're all looking forward to a great evening. Abhrajyoti was a student. He graduated in 2011, and he keeps sending many of his writings. He writes extremely well. He can also be very, his writing can be very scathing. I remember one piece he wrote about Agha Shahid in the caravan. And I told him that he was writing about a writer who had written on Agha Shahid. And he said, this book is worse than entries in Wikipedia. I thought there could be no worse criticism than that. But I really enjoyed reading it. But even as a student, he was often very critical of me as a teacher and others. I remember he had taken advertising and I was teaching branding. And at that time, Martin Lindstrom had released a book called Biology, B-U-Y-O-L-O, and I talked about it in class. He was very disappointed. He thought it was a very shallow book, and I should not be promoting such books. And for one industrial visit, I think it was in Chennai, I used a lot of music in my class, in my sessions. And I used, I think, Pink Floyd and Bob Dylan. And then I used a song from Three Idiots, Give Me Some Sunshine. He was very upset with me. He said, you're playing to the gallery. So that was something. So I've had very interesting conversation chats with. I'm very happy he also agreed. Both of them are coming from out of station. And I'm sure all of us will have a great time. Thank you both for being with us.
It's my privilege to welcome our distinguished speakers, Mr. Jeet Thayil and Mr. Abhrajyoti Chakraborty, to the stage.
Hi, good evening. Me. Am I audible at the back? Okay. Thank you, Sudhakar sir, for this. Hear me? Yeah. Check 1, 2, 3. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Sudhakar sir, for this very warm and, in my case at least, undeservedly generous introduction. I live in New Delhi now, and each time I come back to Bombay, I walk past this campus. I'll be honest, I feel really sad about the ways in which the college, the city, and so much everywhere has changed. But then I step inside the gate, meet Sudhakar sir, and then watch him ask a student who has turned up late for class to, leave again. And I somehow think that, maybe some things never change. I'm very pleased to be in conversation today with Jeet, the man of the hour. Jeet has written and published five novels, 7 collections of poetry, and also 2 libretti. He has he's collaborated on multiple albums as a musician, edited 2 anthologies of modern Indian poetry, and also he's written in his own words thousands of pieces of indifferent or bad journalism, as you once wrote, for money. He's frank about it. But if you were to ask him what he'd rather be doing, I bet he will remind you of a character from Roberto Bolaño's novel 2666, who says at one point, "Only poetry isn't shit." I think poetry has always been a higher imperative with Jeet. But then again, 10 years ago, in a preface to his collected poems, and I'm going to quote something he wrote here. In a preface to his collected poems, which came out at Aleph, you guys should go back and look it up. He wrote about a collection that was first published in 2008. This is the book. It's called "These Errors Are Correct." It's a collection of poetry dedicated to his late wife, Shakti Bhatt. And this was published in 2008. And the bit I'm quoting from, he wrote this in 2015 in a introduction to his collected poems. He wrote this, that "These Errors Are Correct" is the last full-length collection of poems I intend to publish. For various reasons, I am unable to equal the poems in that book, and it seems to me that if you cannot equal or improve on your last book, it is better not to publish at all. I am 55 years old. Time, once a friend, is now the enemy. Each day is a gift that must be returned. Well, Jeet is 65 now, and just this year, he has published not 1, 2 new full-length collections of poems. There's one I have here. It's called, I'll have it here. And there's another one, I think you'll get copies at the back. It's a collection he has co-authored with the Australian poet John Kinsella. It's called "The City Under the City." So let's begin with a difficult question, I guess. Why did you stop, Jeet? And why were you lying?
I'll get to that in 1 minute. I just want to say that when I was in Wilson College, obviously, no surprise, I was in the literature department, but I was the only student in the literature department. As Professor Sudhakar just told you, I was in literature, but I was the only student in literature for 3 years. And so that was, in a way, it was a great thing because you got a lot of attention from 3 amazing professors, Professor Kurian, Professor Karai, and Professor Ukhaji. All women, all amazing. But the flip side of that was if I cut a class, it was very obvious. And they seemed to take it personally when I cut classes, which was more often than any of you, I'm sure. Yeah. So about saying that I was done with poetry, what I really meant, and I wasn't lying at that time, it was absolutely true. I thought it was done because I hadn't written poems in a while. And I really thought that that book was it, that I could never equal it, never mind writing anything better, for a lot of reasons. And it wasn't that I had given up. I felt that poetry had given up on me. and it just wasn't coming anymore. And then, so that was 2008. In 2015, I wrote a poem, 2 poems actually. And I thought it was just an aberration, that, it was just something that happened. I put it aside and didn't really think about it. And then a few years later, they started to come again. And so when this book appeared, when I'll Have It Here appeared, there had been a gap of 16 years since the previous book of poems. So it really wasn't a lie. It was just maybe self-dramatization or something where, or a kind of nihilism maybe, or a kind of negative intelligence where you assume the worst, kind of catastrophic thinking. Because if anything, and I think you know this too, you can have some control over fiction. Because it's sort of like a job. You turn up at, the office every day, you turn up at your desk every day. But with poetry, it's something quite different. You do turn up at a desk if you're working at a book of poems, but you never know what's going to happen. It's sort of like getting into a boat on a beach with an ocean in front of you or a sea in front of you and kind of rowing off, and you have no idea where the boat will land or if it will ever find land.
Well, as Jeet was talking, it struck me that Jeet is an illustrious company with the gap that he was talking about, this hiatus or silence, however you see it, poetic silence. There was Adil Jusawala, who I'm sure many of you must have heard of. He publishes his landmark collection of poems, Missing Person, I think in the late 70s or mid 70s? 75. 76. And then by the time he only publishes his next collection of poems, I think decades later in 2011, Trying to Say Goodbye.
37 years
later. There's also Arun Kolatkar, who published a very elliptical and wonderfully irreverent collection titled Jejuri, 1976. It wins the Sahitya Academy Award, I think. And then 28 or 30 years go by. By the time his next set of poems, the Kala Ghora poems, come out. 2004, the year he passed away. And of course, there's also Jeet's literary hero, Dom Moraes, who won the Hawthornden Prize when he was 17 or 18. The Hawthornden Prize used to be one of the most prestigious prizes you could win internationally as a poet writing in English. Translations. Hello? Yeah. Okay, yeah, as I was saying, the Hawthornden Prize used to be one of the most prestigious prizes you could win globally as a poet writing in English. Dom Moraes won this prize when he was 17 or 18. And then not long after, he's just stopped writing poems. Okay, we'll come back to Jeet's riveting relationships with these unheeded ancestors we share as Indian.
This is the problem with wireless mics.
Yeah.
Wires are better, I think, in my opinion.
Abhi theek hai? Okay, yeah. So yeah, we'll come back to that. But I want to tell you that, the two collections I talked about, I'll Have It Here and The City Under the City, those aren't the only two books Jeet has published just this year. There's also this one, it's called The Elsewherians. Lovely book jacket, as you can see. Jeet calls it a documentary novel, by which I assume, or he presumably means that it's neither complete fact nor complete fiction. But real or not, I think what attempt here is to answer a question we've all asked ourselves or our parents while growing up, which is, the question is, what was it like? What was it like before we were born? Jeet uses, I think, photographs, vignettes, then his father's journal entries to, I think, paint a immensely moving portrait of his parents. We'll start with the reading from early in the book, and Jeet will set it up for you. This is the Bombay. Early years
in This is a book about a kind of a fictional take on my parents' life, but a lot of it includes actual photos, things that they did in real life, things that they didn't do in real life. And so there's a kind of an ethical question there. Is it correct to use people who are still alive in a fictional context and make them characters in a novel? Check in. Checking.
Hello, check.
Good. Yeah, so the question is, if you're going to use people who are alive, people who actually exist, and they appear in a novel under their own names, is that ethical? To get around that question of whether it's ethical or not, I asked permission from my parents. I went to each of them separately, told them what I was doing, showed them photographs that I was using, told them how the pictures would appear, and even showed them the document that I was working on my laptop. So my mother saw her picture, she saw the story around it. Of course, she never was able to hold the book because she died in January. And so when I asked them permission, my father gave it immediately. He was quite happy with the idea of being a character in a novel. You know, because there are stories here, there are photos. For example, a photograph of him coming out of jail in Bihar. He was the editor of a newspaper called Searchlight in Bihar. And there were riots in Patna, and he took the side of the students and put them on the newspaper in the front page, which the chief minister didn't like. And the chief minister's name was K.B. Sahai. He put my father in jail. And to this day, people say that it was the best career move my father ever made, because it made him famous overnight. And he somehow was never quite able to live up to that level of notoriety in subsequent years. Anyway, he gave his permission immediately and enthusiastically. My mother didn't. She was very reluctant. Of course, there was no question that she would eventually say yeah, but I think she had more of a sense of what fiction is than my father did. Certainly, she had more of a sense of what my fiction is like, because she had read Narcopolis and was horrified by a lot of it. So she was really kind of wary, and when she did eventually give her permission, it was wholeheartedly. So what I'm going to read is a bit from when Ammu and George, the characters who are my parents, first come to Bombay and what they find here. In Bombay, they lived with George's brother, Baby, and Baby's wife, and 2 children. The newly married couple sleep on the floor of the front room in a small Mahim flat. To Ammu, the city is too big to visualize, except as a collection of pictures. Night streets lit yellow by sodium lights. The sea like a circus attraction. Crowds at the bus depots and train stations. Crowds at the tea shops and bakeries and stores that line the causeways and on the pavements and against the sea walls, bundled up in the heat, the poor. She cannot connect the city's size with the maps she's seen, and she cannot visualize its shape or density. Most of all, she is awed by how well it's organized. The newspaper man who comes at dawn with a copy of the Free Press that George worked on the previous night. The raddiwala in the afternoon who buys old newspapers and magazines by weight. The man on a bicycle who stops twice a day with warm bread in a jute bag. The garbage collectors who appear in the morning and the night soil collectors who work in the small hours. The way the gas lamps on the street are lit each evening by a municipal worker who returns at first light to extinguish them. The street washing trucks that trundle into view at dawn and leave the roads sparkling, the only time of day they'll be this way. It's thrilling to be part of such a system.
Thank you, Jeet. That was excellent. If you flip past the opening pages of the Elsewherians, I think you get a very good idea of Jeet's range of influences and sensibilities. Well, there is the dedication here to his mother, Ammu George, who Jeet writes, preferred the fictional over the real, which gives you an idea about the novel and what you're going to read, I think. And this dedication is followed by, I think, 10 epigraphs. Most writers would do 1 or 2 or 3, but Jeet is being generous to us readers here with 10. And if you see, if you flip through these quotes, there's one by the Polish poet Czesław Miłosz. There's one from the New Testament. There's one from the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, which is a Vedic commentary, an early Hindu text of sorts. There's a quote from the mid-century American poet Robert Lowell. There's one from Virginia Woolf. There's one from one of Jeet's very eccentric uncle, Malayali uncle, who's obsessed with this 19th century French poet named Charles Baudelaire. And just in case you think Jeet isn't serious enough, he also quotes from a song by the high priestess of millennial breakups, Taylor Swift. Just these epigraphs strike me as so eclectic and idiosyncratic, and I kind of thought and wondered, reading this book and just these epigraphs, what were you reading and listening to as a child or growing up as a teenager at 13, 14?
The short answer to that, everything. I read everything I could get my hands on, really, and listened to everything I could get my hands on, and eventually settled on some things that I like. But even now, I read everything, really. Especially on bad days, especially if I'm not at my happiest or at my brightest, I read, and it always makes me feel better. Anyway, to go back to one of the phrases that begins the book, the one by Czeslaw Milosz, this is a quote that I think anybody with a writer in the family will agree with. So he said, when a writer is born into a family, the family is finished. Good luck to your families.
Well, makes me very afraid right now. So as the excerpt that Jeet just read, after that, if you read the novel, you'll see that you kind of see a character who may or may not be Jeet being born. And I think he spent, maybe I'm wrong, Jeet can correct me, I think you spent a few years growing up in Bombay, then you moved with your parents to Hong Kong, and then again, of course, you came back to Bombay for college. Oh, Hong Kong to New York, then back to Hong Kong, then to Bombay for college here at Wilson. So tell us something about, take us back to those years. When did you start, or did you start writing seriously back then? What did you, or did you see yourself as a poet, if at all? And I also wonder, since we'll get into talking about Jeet's other novels, I also wonder if those things were in any way, they happened at the same time that you discovered those opium dens or khanas, however you call it, in just next to Navjeevan Society buildings on Shuklaji Street.
Which, luckily or unluckily, was a 20-minute walk from Wilson College. 25 minutes if you were in a hurry, and we often were in a hurry. And of course, nobody had any money for a cab in those days, often not even for a bus, so we did that walk pretty often. The writing actually did begin around that time. Certainly I was writing poems, but in a very disorganized, unambitious way, and I never took myself seriously enough as a writer to spend enough time on it and to work on it seriously, you know. So I had fragments, and which is why it took years to publish that first book, which was a book called Gemini with the amazing poet Vijay Nambisan. We shared it. Slim book. We had about 20 poems each. And I was 30-something when that book appeared, which is my first book, and which tells you exactly how disorganized and out of it, really, I must have been. One of the first things to be published in terms of prose was a book review in the Wilsonian, published by Mrs. Kurian, who was the head of the English department at the time, and it was a review of a Hermann Hesse book called Narcissus and Goldmund. And excellent book. Grateful that she gave it to me. So that, I think, was one of the few things in terms of prose that I published. Then I began to write for newspapers in Bombay, including, as Adil was telling us today, for the Indian Express. I did some book reviews for the Express. Went to meet him at his office in Cuff Parade, the Indian Express building, and he was editing the Sunday magazine. I went up to him. He had no idea who I was. I was a student at Wilson College, and said, "Can I review books for you?" And he gave me a book that was a autobiography by a senior policeman. And to this day, I've wondered if the reason he did that was because he saw this kind of skinny, criminal-looking person and thought he would give him a policeman's book to see if something interesting would happen, you know. My only explanation for being given that book to review.
Well, I'm glad he brought it up. You say your first book came out when you were 34 or 35, Gemini. 32. But you was, in those years, you were clued into the Bombay poetry scene. Where do you want to talk about meeting Dom and Arvind or Nissim and the gang? Because when Sudhakar sir was talking about the year you graduated, 1981, it seems to me 1981 is also the year Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children comes out, right? And it wins the Booker Prize, and that brings in global audience for Indian fiction in English. But then the poets, well, many of them were silent and not publishing in those years, but they were and continue to be curiously forgotten.
Thanks for bringing up Midnight's Children. That was 1981, and the kind of revelatory point about that book was it wasn't until I read Midnight's Children that I realized that you could write fiction about Bombay in a very contemporary, interesting, literary way. It was a revelation actually for a lot of people who read Midnight's Children at that time, because he had references to Pedder Road, he had references to ads, commercials, jingles, movies that anyone who lived in Bombay would kind of recognize. And it was a new kind of literature, at least for me, and certainly for several writers alive then, including Arundhati Roy. There would be no God of Small Things if it hadn't been for Midnight's Children. She got a lot of her style from Midnight's Children. And it was a kind of a door that opened. About the poets, the only poet that I knew was Dom Moraes, because he was a friend of my father's and mother's from New York. They'd both been working with the United Nations World Population Year. Yeah, he did. Yeah, A Matter of People. He did a book about it, Dom, eventually. But the United Nations had the very weird idea of hiring writers and poets from all over the place. And my father and Dom ended up at the UN at the same time. And Dom and his wife Leela, the actress Leela Naidu, came to our home in New York one day. And according to Leela, many years later when we became friends, she said that I and my sister turned up in the living room because we were asked to come out, forced to come out by my parents to meet the guests. And we were introduced to the guests, and according to Leela, I scowled at her, didn't say a word, and walked away back into my room. And this is very likely true, because at that time I was convinced that any friend of my parents couldn't be interesting, you know, in any way, and it wasn't somebody I would want to be friends with. And then, of course, I turned up in Bombay, and at the age of 26, and I remember this so clearly, went to a reading by Dom at the Theosophy Hall, where he, at that time, had a drinking problem, and the real problem, as in the Tom Waits song, I don't have a drinking problem except when I can't get a drink. The real problem that day was he had not had a drink. And because he had not had a drink, his hands were shaking. And when he picked up this poem to read, it was shaking so violently that everyone could see it, and it was embarrassing. And then he put the sheet of paper down and tried to drink a glass of water. Couldn't. The water was shaking so much, he put it down. Then he read. And he read beautifully, because once he began reading, he was shaky, but once he got into it, the words took over. And kind of carried him through it. After the reading, I should have gone up and said, hello, I'm so-and-so's son, and we met once in New York when I was a brat, but I was too shy to go up and introduce myself. I was introduced later that year by a mutual friend called Vasant Pandit, and then Dom and I became friends. But I just want to say that Dom was a very different kind of Bombay poet. Unlike most of the other poets, the Indian poets of that time, he was absolutely generous with his time, especially with young, broke poets. He knew what it meant. So anytime you needed a hot meal or a drink, you went to Dom's house and you knew you would always be taken care of. You know, incredible. Yeah. That was the, one of the formative events, I think, of my life. And the great thing about Dom was we never had a conversation about literature or poetry. You know, there was never a time when I said, so how did you write this, or anything like that. But what I learned from him was how to live as a poet, how to be a poet in the world. Because when you're young and you're writing poetry, and I'm sure there are people in this room who feel this way, you don't think that there's any way forward. It's very difficult to imagine a way forward when you're writing poetry, especially in some situations. And you think, what an impossible ambition. How can I ever have a book of poems with my name on it? It just seems impossible. And it seems even more impossible to imagine a life as a writer. How do you write every day and make it pay enough to pay your rent and all of that stuff? As a young person, it seemed impossible to me until I met Dom and hung out with him and saw how he did it. So I think that's the lesson that you learn as a young writer when you meet older writers. You see that it's possible to have a life as a writer, and that although it seems impossible is too mild a word. Although it seems beyond the realm of any human possibility, you realize that it is possible to live and work as a writer.
Oh, I think I need a moment to think about that. It's tremendously depressing. But I think that's a good occasion for you to read a poem that you wrote based on Dom, the sonneteer. Do you want to read it? I think you can read here.
Well, I'm going to go there because this is so hot. Haven't read this. Check. Haven't read this poem in a long, long time. It's a sonnet which Dom Moraes was a kind of a master of, a form that Moraes was a master of. And in case you don't know what that is, what a sonnet is, it's 14 lines. You know? All right. 14 lines, usually 4 stanzas, 4 quatrains. So 4 verses, 4 stanzas of 4 lines each, and then a couplet to end it. 14 lines in all. And each of the stanzas has a rhyme scheme, so it'll be, say, A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. And then there are many variations, but that's the form. And the great thing about a sonnet is, you think that it's so difficult, right? It's 14 lines, it has these rules. How are you going to write a sonnet with so many rules? But the point is, because of the rules, it makes it much easier to write. Because you write 2 lines and you know what the next 2 rhymes are going to be. You know what the next 2 rhymes have to be. And that kind of makes the poem almost write itself. I find sonnets have a kind of ease that, that helps. So this is called the sonneteer. And some of the incidents in it are from Dom's life. I was famous. I won the Hawthornden Prize. Girls flashed me. One said, "You're the poet, right?" What a god-awful waste it would be otherwise. I told her my talents would not last the night. And it was a waste. You bet, any which way. She said, "Poetry boy, I don't give a damn. I've got time to kill. Make a sonnet for moi." She hawks her beauty in the night, I began, and stopped, unable to motor my mouth. One morning, I stepped out for cigarettes and hopped a subway to the south. I thought I'd vanish myself and my debts. For months, she heard my step on the stair. It wasn't me, brothers. I was taking the air. Thank you.
Precisely around the time that Jeet claimed that he'd stopped writing poetry, he wrote and he published a triad of, to my mind, absorbing novels, whose pages, I've read and reread them a couple of times. The pages seem to be drenched in the sick and sweet, I think that's a phrase you use somewhere, sick and sweet pull of the city by the sea. I'm talking about this novel, of course, his debut novel, his breakout novel. It's called Narcopolis, which Sudhakar sir was also talking about. This book, I think, came out in around 2011 or 2012. And it came out around the same time I graduated from Wilson and was trying and failing to be a writer in Bombay. I remember, of course, that it was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize, but the early reviews, in India at least, correct me if I'm wrong, were rather combative and pretty disappointing. I'll give the mic to Jeet to respond to that, but I just want to say that, so the book begins with a 2,000-word long opening sentence, which you should all go back home and look up and read if you haven't. I mean, if you are from Bombay and haven't read the opening sentence of Narcopolis, what are you even doing with your life? But I just want to say that about the reviews, I remember I was talking about the opening sentence because there was someone reviewed this book in a newspaper, I forget the name, with a 800-word long sentence of their own. Do you remember this? And like the entire review was in one sentence, 800 words long. And I remember that in the review they were advising Jeet, while composing it in an 800-word long sentence, they were advising Jeet to sort of break down his sentence into smaller bits. And I remember, I mean, so many reviews, or so many critics and reviewers here, readers here missed the point of the book early, I think. And the thrill of encountering something so original and new. But then again, and this is how I think a reflection of our the literary scene here, once the novel was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, the same critics and reviewers would praise the book as a long, cherished darling, you know, a classic as they call it. It became a classic, instant classic. Do you want to talk about that, those years of, finally making your debut as a novelist, those breakout years?
It's a 6.5-page sentence, and the thing about the sentence is there are no semicolons. I cannot emphasize this enough. There are no semicolons. If you have semicolons, you can stretch a sentence forever. You can make a 1,000-page novel out of it. But if you're using only commas, that takes some kind of work. You have to keep rewriting till you get it. That 800-word sentence had lots of semicolons. So, it was a cheat. And maybe if he had worked on it a little harder, my advice to him would be work on it a little harder, spend a few more days or at least a few more hours and get rid of your semicolons, and maybe one day you'll be able to write a long sentence.
I think, I hope you go home and look up and read the opening sentence of Narcopolis, the long 2,000-word sentence. Jeet is going to read from the book, a section which is just after that sentence, 6.5-page word long sentence. Do you want to do that? Just this page, I think. We'll skip that. We'll just do this.
This is chapter 1. Chapter 1. It's called Dimple. Before Dimple came to be called Zeenat, she worked part-time for Rashid and disappeared every evening to the Hijraz brothel. I smoked at her station even if other pipes were free, and we talked the way smokers talk, horizontally, with long pauses, our words so soft they sounded like the incomprehensible phrases spoken by small children. I asked the usual foolish questions. Is it better to be a man or a woman? Dimple said, for conversation, better to be a man. I'm so sorry. For conversation, better to be a woman. For everything else, for sex, better to be a man. Then I asked her if she was a man or a woman, and she nodded as if it was the first time she'd ever been asked that question. She was about 25 then, and she had a habit in those days of shaking the hair into her eyes and smiling for no reason at all. A sweet smile, as I remember, with no hint there of the changes that would overtake her. She said, "Woman and man are words other people use, not me. I'm not sure what I am. Some days I'm neither, or I'm nothing. On other days I feel I'm both. But men and women are so different. How can one person be both? Isn't that what you're thinking? Well, I'm both, and I've learned some things to my cost, the kind of thing you're better off not knowing if you mean to live in the world. For example, I know something about love, and how lovers want to consume and be consumed and disappear into each other. I know how they yearn to make two equal one, and I know it can never be. What else? Women are more evolved biologically and emotionally. That's well known and it's obvious. But they confuse sex and the spirit. They don't separate. Men, as you know, always separate. They separate their human and dog natures. And then she said, I'd like to tell you more about it, about the family resemblance between men and dogs, because I have plenty to say, as you may have guessed, but what would be the point? There's little chance you'd understand. After all, you are a man. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeet. Thank you, Jeet. That was excellent. So bit that Jeet just read, the narrator in the section is this character named Dominic Ullis, and his name Dom throughout the novel. You can probably guess, take your guess, where Jeet was drawing inspiration from. But this Dominic Ullis character, in this book, at least in the first two sections, he says he works as a proofreader somewhere. But all we see him doing, of course, is just smoking a pipe and getting high with Dimple. And this is, just pay attention, I think this is pretty interesting and will give you an insight into his writing process. This Dominic character is also the narrator of Jeep's third novel, which is called Low. Low is set in the Bombay of 2016, of 2017, around the time Trump is in power. Yeah. So yeah, 2016, 2017. And by now, Dominic has become a writer of sorts. Again, another connection is like in Narcopolis, at one point, Dom goes to a reading by a fictional poet and painter named Francis Newton Xavier. And this Francis Newton, and in the novel, Dom even takes Francis Newton Xavier back to meet Dimple to her opium khana and smoke a pipe. And this Francis Newton Xavier is also the central character in Jeet's magnificently sprawling second novel. I don't have a copy, but it's a wonderful book. I can only imagine what it must have taken to write a book of that sort. It's called The Book of Chocolate Saints. But just because I think students here might find this interesting, can you talk about how these books seem to blend into one another? I mean, I don't know if you remember this. I think you spoke somewhere that before any of these books were published, you had like a 1,000-page manuscript, and then, well.
Thanks. Thank you. I'm glad you like the Book of Chocolate Saints. I think that's probably my best work, and I hope never to work that hard on anything ever again. It took 6 years of labor, and what's the point? I mean, who even notices? One person out of 200? I'm being facetious, of course. It's always worth it. Yeah, so it began with 1,000+ page manuscripts that I called something like "This is That," which is a phrase from Hindu spiritual thought. I forget where I found it exactly, but the phrase recurs in this passage somewhere. And that was the title of the book. It was just way too long. And I cut out a 80,000-word manuscript from that 1,000-page book, which became Narcopolis, which is about 250 pages. And then the material that was left over, I used in Book of Chocolate Saints, and of course reconfigured it and rewrote it and remade it into a separate novel, which works on its own, but if you know the background, I think it works better. And Low was completely new. It was not part of that original manuscript, and it was the fastest thing I've ever written. Took me about 9 months to write. Wrote it in a burst, and as Abra was saying, it's the only one of my books that he's read at one stretch. And there's a reason for that. It is a book that is kind of fast-paced, and you can read it at a stretch without taking a break, really. So that's how those three books came together. And after Narcopolis, the Book of Chocolate Saints, and Low, and I call it the Bombay trilogy. After the Bombay trilogy, I really needed to get Bombay out of my system and get the whole question of drugs and intoxication of one type or the other and addiction and God and love and death and all the themes that these three books kind of circle around. To get that out of my system and kind of reboot, do a cleanse, and write something totally different. And that was Names of the Women, which again was also a very fast book, about 8 or 9 months, and it's a take on the New Testament in which 15 of the women characters in the New Testament whose names you never hear, whose names are never spoken in the New Testament, or very rarely. Of the 15, I think 2 or 3 are named in the Bible, but the others are just, they appear like cameos and then they disappear, although they play crucial roles in the New Testament and in the life of Christ. So this novel has 15 chapters, and each one is one of the women in the New Testament, and it ends with her name. Of course, many of the names are fictional, and it's a novel, but again, it's a fast novel, I think, to write and to read.
I'm so glad Jeet mentioned the names of the women. I think it's a very unusual novel coming from you. Well, for one, there are no drugs in that novel, but you are still tripping when you read it, I think, a fair amount. Jeet is now, do you want to read from Low? Yeah. Jeet is now going to read from Low, which, just to set it up, it's a book that begins rather scintillatingly, I would say, when Dom, by now he's become a writer, of course, and also a recent widower. He's just cremated his wife in a crematorium in New Delhi, collected her ashes in a box, and then gone straight from the crematorium to the Delhi airport and escaped with the box containing his wife's ashes to Bombay. And it's set sometime in, as I was saying, in the mid-2010s, 2016, 2017. And yeah, Jeet is going to read from it.
The idea of the book is, as Abhrajyoti said, a man who's recently widowed, who goes to Bombay from Delhi with a box of ashes to find clear, clean water in which to immerse the ashes, as one should. And of course, in Bombay, that isn't exactly easy to find, clean, clear, flowing water. This is a moment where he's in a taxi and he's driving into the suburbs. And it's a description of Bombay. This book was published in Yeah, 2020. So it depicts India in about 2016, 2018, thereabouts. And a lot of it, I think, still applies to Bombay today. In fact, maybe more so. All around him, the city swarmed. The junkyard city with its $1,000,000 views of the junkyard. Ahead of him, the Palais Royal, newest and highest of high-rises, surrounded by slums on every side, an embodiment of the city's long-standing tryst with ugliness and wealth. The building's construction delayed while municipal officers extracted the largest bribes possible. Around it, a forest of other high-rises, grandiose exercises in excess, a secret society of unsold apartments in overpriced buildings, the neighboring red light district raised and remade into office towers, the street of opium dens and hashish parlors become travel agencies and retail emporia. the Soviet-era blocks of unbridled brutalism beside 19th century examples of genteel Victoriana, the whole breathtaking tumble-down palace taking shape now out of the early morning smog. All around him, the glorious ash heap of the city coming into view degree by unexpected degree. The abandoned textile mills converted into chic prefab night spots, the tanneries raised and reconstructed into white-walled art galleries, the surviving docks and fisheries coming to life, entire neighborhoods submerged under the smell of dry fish, the banyan and peepal trees turned into shrines with a bit of colored fabric, a stub of lit candle, a smear of kumkum. The silk cotton trees become homes for the homeless. Every tree and corner and street and neighborhood, an endless gradation of caste and ghetto, the ocean of lower middle, islands of upper middle, and the ever-flowing river of middle. The East Indian convention halls and doilied homes where elderly couples dance the twist, singing along to Jim Reeves and Cliff Richard, a print of blonde, blue-eyed Jesus above a perpetual candle in the living room. The young courting couples and married couples huddling in the dark on the seafront, trying for a moment of intimacy away from the eyes of joint families and predatory constables. The secret beach at Mahim and its dirty brown sand, the miles-long railway station, market stalls already selling up cheap underwear, pirated movies, sex toys, time-saving kitchen gadgets, and fresh marigolds for the temple. The air-conditioned, windowless rooms that exist beyond day or night, where figures on the couch are always interchangeable and the drugs on the coffee table cut with powdered milk and local anesthetic, where a girl dances alone in the kitchen to music no one else can hear, music more basic than the 4/4 EDM playing in the rest of the house. And as the taxi sped past neighborhoods he classified according to the drugs he had taken and the houses he had taken them in, the city became a catalog of unstable highs and terrible lows, the years of addiction and withdrawal that marked his life before he met Aki one Saturday afternoon in Manhattan. That was also one sentence.
Thank you, Jeet. I just had an idea. Maybe I'm wrong to think that. I think the number of times you talked about tripping, I'm sure the ghost of John Wilson tonight turned in his grave. But when Jeet was talking about EDM, it just reminded me, in case for those of you who don't know, Jeet has obviously worked for 2 decades, more than 2 decades as a musician, 2 or 3 decades as a musician. And as I was telling a few students, you should probably look up some of his work on Spotify. There's one period that or one aspect that I hope he can talk about, and maybe it might be useful to a lot of people here, that Jeet was talking about how Dom Moraes taught him to be a poet in the world. But it strikes me that being a musician in the world is a different thing. And around the time I first heard of Jeet or knew of Jeet I knew him first as a musician. You were part of this 2-piece band called Sridhar and Thayil with the singer Sumana Sridhar. And how do you differentiate between being a poet or a writer in the world and then a musician in the world, which is a more performative aspect? There is a more performative aspect. Well, you obviously make the music somewhere in a room, but then there is a performative aspect to it, which is pretty important.
Thanks. Yeah, well, both really difficult lives. poetry and music. When we were in that band, Sridhar Thayil, it was Suman, Sridhar and I, and we would have a revolving cast of musicians in the band, bass, drums, keyboards, and the two of us. I played guitar and did vocals, and she sang jazz, opera, Hindustani classical, all three. And we wrote our own music. So I'll just give you an example of how difficult it is to live as a musician in India. And by the way, I've checked, and this still applies today. They would fly us in to whichever city, Pune or Bangalore or Delhi, at 7 a.m. Because at 7 a.m., the flight tickets are 1,000 rupees cheaper than at noon or at 1. So you fly in at 7, you get to the venue at about 11 or 12, and you're way too early because the sound check guys only turn up at about 4, like reasonable people. So you have to hang about till 4. They don't give you a room because that would be, wait, you're not worth a room really, And so you hang about at the venue. They might give you a coupon for lunch and a coupon for a drink, and you wait till the sound guys turn up, invariably late. They turn up at 5, takes them an hour to set up. You do the sound check. You go through each instrument, each mic, you check all the levels. You finally find a level that works. Great, it's already 7 p.m. People have started coming in. You get a minute to go backstage and change your shirt. Forget a shower, that's, you don't rate a shower. And you do the show. Show starts at about 9, maybe ends at about 11. You pack up your gear and you're on a plane at 1 in the morning. So you never get a chance to sit back and relax and maybe talk to a few people and have a drink. You pack up, they fly you to the airport, and you fly back at 1 or 2 a.m. because at 1 and 2 a.m. the flights are cheaper than the next day, and they don't have to pay for your hotel room. And so this is how it started. In 2012, this is how it was. And then a bit later, a promoter came up with the idea of a landed fee. And the landed fee is they give you 1 lakh and leave everything to you. So you fly 4 people to whichever city. You stay with friends, obviously. There's no budget for a hotel. And then but you do it all yourself. Eventually it works out the same. For the band, a band of 4, sometimes 5 people, the payment after all that rehearsal and all of that would be 30,000 rupees, which works out to about 4,000 each. It's a hard life. But in fact, I often tell poets, it's a harder life than being a poet.
And here I was thinking that those who perform at the NH7 weekend are living the good life. I think how are we doing for time? Maybe we'll do one more question and then open it up. Okay. Do you have any questions? Is there a mic going around?
Check.
Good evening, and thank you, Mr. Jeet, for sharing your writings. The question that I had is, considering you have lived in different countries, how difficult is it to choose which country do you set your story in? Because being, like, I also write fiction and screenplay, and sometimes it gets difficult. Do I set it in Bombay or my hometown? So, yeah.
In fact, I'm struggling with that question on the book I'm working on right now, and I don't know whether to set it in Bombay or in Goa or an unnamed city, because it's kind of set a little into the future. I think the city that you set it in should be the city that best tells the story that you're trying to tell. So if it's a screenplay of, or if it's a thriller, say, and there's an element of crime, and you can't set that in, I don't know. Well, actually, you can set that anywhere these days. Yeah, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, like, the emotions are universal, relationships are universal, so it could probably end up in any city. So it's a tough choice. So I mean, I don't know how does one navigate that and finally zero down to one, geography.
I think in that case, just go with whichever city you will have most fun writing. And whichever city you know well enough to take some major liberties with. And that, the thing about writing a long form, a novel or a screenplay, anything that you have to be at for years, unlike a poem, say, is that you have to be enthusiastic as well. Every time you turn up to work, you have to be into it. It has to turn you on. You have to be enthusiastic enough to pursue it to the end. And to do that, you should really pick a city, pick characters, pick a situation that interests you and will keep you going, and that you discover something about as you're working on it.
I think we have one here.
Hi, so my question is more regarding the business side of publishing in a way. So when you bend rules by writing 2,000-word opening statements in Narcopolis, do you get pushback from, say, agents, editors, publishers? And if you do, how do you deal with that?
I mean, I think today if you were to write a book like that, you would probably get a lot of pushback. I was really lucky. I sent it to my agent. He loved it. And the first publisher that he sent it to bought the book in a week. Liked it enough. And I think that opening sentence had a lot to do with it. At least that particular editor who grabbed the book. And later we became friends, and he was an editor at Faber, and of course it all made sense later because I realized that his habits and proclivities had a lot of similarity to the habits and proclivities of the characters in Narcopolis.
Was this Ted Hodgkinson?
No, it was Lee Brackstone,
Oh, okay.
who later started a publishing house called White Rabbit that does only music biographies. Yeah.
I've heard of him, yeah. Yep. I just wanna...
So now, music and poetry are also kind of related because of a rhythm to that. But how do you think music has also played a role in your prose, writing prose?
Thanks. When I work on a song, the most important thing for me is the melody and the way the melody progresses into the bridge and then the chorus. And there are lots of elements that go into it. The chords, the other musicians, the other singer, the things that each of the musicians bring into it. So I really don't worry too much about the lyrics. I might have a set of lyrics that I change on the spot while we are rehearsing, and then I just don't take lyrics as seriously as I take poetry or prose, because there are so many other tools at your disposal in music. And I might make the most ridiculous changes in the verse of a song that I would never attempt in a poem. But don't tell anybody.
So there is a live stream happening. And one of the questions that someone has asked is, how much does religion influence your work? After you answer that, I have two questions of my own, but first that.
Can I piggyback on that into that question? And like, because you were, in response to this person's question, you were talking about agents. It struck me. I'll ask you a question I'm often asked by agents and editors outside India. Do contemporary, dare I say, political concerns creep into your work? Or, let me be blunt and crude here. Are you in danger of writing the great Indian novel about Modi's India anytime soon?
Absolutely not. I think there are enough people doing that. And I mean, maybe it's a perversity on my part. I'm sure I would have made a much better living if I did kind of write the trendy book. Like, for example, right now the thing to do would be to write a kind of thriller / romance about a couple and, make that a story, because there are a lot of those books around. But the thing is, if you do write one of those books, you will become part of a pack. And I can't remember the names of any of those writers, I think it's better to kind of distinguish what's trendy and go exactly the other way. I think it's a much smarter thing to do in terms of the long term. Because when this moment passes, and it will, and something new will take its place, as trendy as this particular moment, when that happens, what will be remembered are the outliers, the books that seem to come from nowhere. And you wonder, how did this person write this book?
Do you want to answer the religion question?
Oh, right, yeah. What part does religion play? I think certainly in Narcopolis, in Book of Chocolate Saints, Names of the Women, of course, a huge part. But I want to say that religion is never religious. Let's put it that way. It is always a device used to further the story. And it's always a device in the service of fiction. So it's certainly not right to say that there's a particular religion, that is being kind of sold. Absolutely not. Religion is just something, I think it's very difficult to not be interested in it in our country, because we are the original kind of composite melting pot of religions.
Okay, so I have the advantage of the mic, so I'm just going to take it. So my question to you was actually very close to the first question asked. You now live in Bangalore. Does that city inspire you at all? Bombay, you didn't live that long, but it seems to be a strong backdrop because you lived in many more places. So what is it about Mumbai that inspires you so much?
I lived in Bombay actually the longest of any of the cities that I've lived in. I lived here about 16 years in all. And I lived here at really crucial moments in life. As a very young child, as a schoolboy, and then as a college student, and then as a person taking his first steps into the working world, into jobs and all of that. And then as a householder, the first kind of apartment, it was all here. So those were very formative phases of one's life. And I think that's the reason so many of these stories are set in Bombay. But also, the fact is, there's a reason why so many novels and so many of the poets and so many filmmakers and photographers live in Bombay. This is a photogenic city. You could be walking down the street, and I'm talking to the photographer right here. You could be walking down the street and you could trip over your shoelaces and take an inadvertent photograph and it'll be something interesting. There are very few cities that are so visually and intellectually and emotionally kind of stimulating, where stuff comes out of it. Yeah, I've lived in Bangalore now for a while, but I moved there because of my parents, and yeah, I can't call it home.
So I have another question. So we have Arundhati Roy writing about her mum. You've written about your parents. Is there is there something that all of you writers of a certain age are going through where you're, I don't know, I think we all, after 50, there's something about our parents and us which comes very alive, which doesn't exist when you're younger. I don't know, that's a question, is it or not?
Can I just add, what is it exactly in the water in Kerala this season? I mean, you have Arundhati as well as Jeet writing very introspective books about your parents.
Well, mine was first. Just want to put that on record. Also, I'm not quite as mean to my mother. What was the question again? Yeah, well, you know, the thing is, when you hit a certain age in your life, and certainly in my case, I left home at 17 and never lived at home or with my parents until much, much later. Then I would visit. And I kind of specialized after college and even during college, I kind of specialized in causing them trouble. That was my job. Giving them anxiety, endless anxiety and trouble, and just being the source of everyday kind of problems, real problems. And I did that for really an embarrassingly long time. Like you would expect people to grow out of that kind of behavior. I didn't grow out of it until my 40s. And so a few years ago, I decided to go home because my parents were old, and it was a time when I could finally kind of contribute something to their lives and become a son, which I'd never been, you know, until that moment. So in my case, that might have been, and you know, I was living with them. So in the Elsewerians, every time I needed an answer to a question about a place or a time, I would just cross the house to the other side and ask my mom, who would remember everything, or ask my father, who remembered a lot, and his notebooks. Why have you turned his mic off? So that was such a huge kind of gift and an advantage to be living in the house where the characters that I'm writing about were also living, and to clear up stuff that I didn't remember or questions that I had, they would clear it up. And it just seemed like also like an opportunity for a writer. If you, for the first time in your life, you're living with your parents from when you were a child and a teenager, for the first time in your adult life, you're finally living with your parents. Make use of it in a literary way, you know, write about it. What else do writers do? You write about the stuff closest to you, for better or worse, you know. Again, Czesław Milosz, once a writer is born into a family, the family is finished.
There's a question at the back.
Hi. So just taking on from her question, so you've obviously reached a certain age, and so has Arundhati. They've reached a certain age when you start writing about your parents, so you start kind of, you know, embedding them in your stories or, you know, in part of your literature? Is it also because you've reached a stage in your life now where you're seeing your future and, you know, there is some kind of trying to make good for the bad that you've done?
Tragic but true. So I see cancer in my future. You know, I see. You know, it's a real learning experience to see your father, for example, who has always been the source of authority in your life, to suddenly see him stripped of all authority. In fact, of everything, because he's kind of regressed to being a child because he's in his 90s and unable to do things. It's such a learning experience because you realize this is you if you ever do make that age, which I'm sure I won't for many reasons. But you see that this is the future, you know.
I think we'll take a last question and then Jeet will read a poem and we'll...
Good evening, sir. I wanted to ask that when it comes to the characters of the story, may it be a novel or short story, anything, how do you figure out which character to choose?
Which character to choose?
Yeah. Character to choose in a sense, obviously you can have it reference from the real life, but something about them needs to be fiction, right? And when you start writing, is it in the starting, means it's like a, what do you call it? It's like a sequence when we write plot, theme and characters. And when you write characters, how do you not get driven away while writing the story?
I think when you have a character, even if it starts as a minor character, and this has happened to me many, many times in books, there'll be a minor character, and then as I write and I work on that book for months and years, that minor character takes on a major life and begins to do things and say things that surprise you. And there's a moment when that happens, when you feel that the writer is now out of control, the character is out of control, and you can no longer predict what they might say or do. And that is the best, the most fruitful moment in the writing process. Because when that happens, you know that the character is living their life. And it's independent of you as the writer. And I think that's when characters begin to be successful and begin to be very interesting for you and for the reader.
Okay. I think to close out, Jeet will read a poem that he picked out on the way back, on the way here. It's pretty weather appropriate, I think.
This is a novel, a poem with rain as the connecting tissue, which makes sense for September in Bombay. When it rains, the dead descend. You appear, the smell of rainwater in your hair. Wearing the ring I placed on your finger, a scent like heat and a voice not yours, a child's voice singing of age-old danger in Hindi, a lover's lament from Piazza. Your lips, clear of the color you wear, are not new to me, are lovely and bare, and our old argument still burns. How soon will you forget me if I die? By the river in this room and the way it returns, I swear, if I forget you, let everything die. When it rains, the dead ascend, disappear where we cannot follow, into the living air. Thank you very much. Thank you.
will you join me in thanking Jeet Thayil again? Thank you, Jeet.
And thanks to you for the amazing conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that engaging and insightful session. I would like to request Dr. Anuradha Pense, please come forward and present this token of appreciation to our speakers. To Mr. Jeet Thayil. To Mr. Abhrajyoti Chakraborty. Thank you, ma'am. To conclude this evening, I would like to now invite Professor Sudhakar to deliver the vote of thanks.
I personally don't like vote of thanks. If I had the choice, I would not have it. But this time, I think it's very important for a few reasons. One, I must appreciate the fact that Jeet came, though his father had a surgery, because he had committed to come here, and he made the effort. Really, really appreciate. Thank you so much. I'm very happy with the kind of conversation which Abhrajyoti and Jeet had, because Abhrajyoti had done a lot of homework, and it was really very, very interesting for me. Thank you both for a conversation which was really useful, and I'm sure a lot of young people who aspire to be writers, I'm sure they'll find a lot of interesting things to take home. I must thank Rajshri Naik, because she was the one who took all the effort to coordinate with Jeet and make this possible. Thank you, Rajshri. And for a lot of other things, for both the Wilson Dialogue, she's been a very, very important person. And from college, I must thank Dr. Anuradha Pense, who's vice principal, as well as the treasurer of the Alumni Association. And she heads the alumni committee in Wilson. So it's the alumni committee in Wilson who's taken all the effort to get all the arrangements done. And I thank every one of them. Some of them have left, Sachin, Sumit, and others were there. Thank you very much, because it is a lot of effort to put up a program. And I must appreciate all of you who have come. The challenge for organizing a program like this, will enough people come. And especially when speakers and others are taking the effort and eminent people are coming. So thank every one of you for coming and staying. I hope the snacks are worth your visit along with the session. Thank you very much. I also thank everybody from the college, the people who are managing the sound, and of course the team which has been doing the live streaming, the photographers, every one of you. Thank you very much. We hope to have more sessions like this. Thank you.
A heartfelt thank you to all for joining us and making this a special one. Please take 2 minutes to fill a feedback form that has been shared on the WhatsApp group. Thank you.